Hi, welcome back to our series on lessons from Exodus. Today is episode 3, which is entitled When Disobedience is the Right Choice. Today's topic can be a bit controversial. For a conscientious and law-abiding citizen, the topic today should perhaps not be discussed at all. You may not agree with it, but for a young mind that likes to question everything, this might be of interest to you. Let me set the record straight to start with. I'm not proposing rebellion or civil disobedience as a lifestyle choice. I'm not trying to get you to enlist in any organization for any cause. But I want you to be aware that there are times when you need to question what you're being asked to do for conscience's sake. In Romans 13, all Christians are exhorted to subject themselves to governing authorities, for they have been appointed by God. This is a Christian standard. Doing this is well-pleasing to God. But is this a blanket command to be followed by all Christians at all times without exceptions? Let's look at history. We know that history is replete with despotic rulers and oppressive governments that demand their citizens unquestioning obedience. In such time, we have seen that there have been deep divisions in the society. On the one hand, you have those who willingly submit to authorities irrespective of whether what they are asked to do are morally justified. On the other hand, we see people rose up against oppressive governments. During World War II, the infamous Nazi regime was followed blindly by German people who condoned with the regime's policy of ethnic cleansing, during which more than 6 million innocent Jews were slaughtered. If you were living in Germany or parts of Europe occupied by Germany at that time, whose side would you take? There were then some very courageous people who, at the cost of their own lives, went against Hitler's bloodthirsty regime. They did their best to help the Jews stay safe or escape Hitler's reach. Many of them met the same fate as the Jews they were trying to help. Today we praise these people who disobeyed the law of Germany at that time and did the right thing. There is a movie called The Schindler's List. If you haven't watched it, you should. I must warn you that there are some scenes in there that you might want to fast forward. This movie is not for the faint of heart. When the British Empire ruled much of the world, there were resistance movements throughout the empire by the local and national leaders who disobeyed the British rule and staged demonstrations, protests, and acts of civil disobedience to overthrow the British rule. India's struggle for freedom was well documented. Today, Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose, and very many Indian freedom fighters are still praised, and their memories are cherished by many Indians for the price they paid to give India her freedom. In Exodus chapter 1, we find some people caught up in a similar situation where to obey the law would mean doing something wrong or immoral, but to disobey could cost them their lives. Let's read Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 to 21. Verse 15. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on their birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. So it was that because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall keep alive." So in this passage, we see that Pharaoh has asked the Hebrew midwives to murder all the male infants given birth by Hebrew mothers. Pharaoh enacted this law to control the Hebrew population growth. This was perhaps the first ever abortion industry set up by a political system. Child sacrifice was already in practice in those days, but they were done by some pagan religious cults. But this one was a government-mandated born-alive abortion of all baby boys. What did the midwives do? They did not have hospitals or clinics where mothers could go and deliver their babies. Even now, in some remote areas where there is no hospital, midwives are employed to help mothers deliver their babies. These days, the first responders also receive training to deliver babies just in case they're in a situation where mothers have to deliver their babies and there is no time to get them to the hospital. Back to our story in Exodus. The midwives were commanded by Pharaoh to kill every Hebrew baby boy at their birth. At the risk of their own lives, the midwives chose to fear God and not kill the babies, boys or girls. They knew it was a sin against God to kill the babies. Pharaoh found out that the baby boys were still kept alive. Needless to say, Pharaoh was displeased that his plan was not working out and these midwives were not doing what they were told. So he summoned them and asked them, why? We don't know if and when or how long they prayed. Perhaps their summon was very sudden, and they did not even have time to ask their friends or families to pray for them. They could easily lose their lives. After all, Pharaoh was a very powerful king of a very powerful nation, and he was known to be ruthless. Obeying Pharaoh could have earned them rewards, but disobeying him could mean losing their heads to the guillotine. When they finally arrived at the court of Pharaoh, they were questioned by Pharaoh himself. Why did you not kill the baby boys? Pharaoh asked. They gave a very tactful answer. We could not. The mothers give birth to their babies before we get there. They're not weak like your Egyptian ladies. An answer like that could have aggravated Pharaoh, they knew. But it was true that the Hebrew women were stronger and livelier than the Egyptian women. Perhaps this was a common knowledge back then. Pharaoh let the midwives go, and he came up with another way to deal with this population control problem. His evil imagination did not run out of stock. Were the midwives truthful in their answers? The part about Hebrew mothers being livelier than the Egyptian mothers was correct. But the part where all the baby boys were born before they got there was a lie. We don't know if Pharaoh believed them. However, we know that he let them go. When God saw that the midwives did what was right, even though they were not entirely truthful, God was pleased with them and blessed them to have their own households. That means God found them good husbands who loved them and took good care of them. We know that God rewards people when they do right. That is what he did for these midwives. They were not perfect, for we know they lied to Pharaoh, but they did the best they could given the situation. Even though God expects us to obey our government and submit to the laws of the land, he expects that our obedience will be subject to a higher law, the law of God. When the law of the land aligns with God's laws, he expects us to obey. When they contradict, we must choose to follow God's laws and be willing to pay the price for it. Are we willing, like these midwives, to do what is right even if doing so can risk our own lives? Or are we looking for an easy way out, even if that means becoming a traitor to our people and disobeying the moral laws of God? Are we lovers of life like God is? Or are we lovers of death like the devil is? If we are willing to choose what is right, even if that means disobeying the laws of the land, God will be on our side and reward us. If not in this lifetime, then in eternity. I shall see you again in the next video. God bless you.